An Appalachian Horror Story, Jonathan Merrimack, 1737. Part 1. The water ran cold around the sides of the boat, opening and closing from bow to stern just like the headwind that had been at our face for the better part of a week. The winds were changing, as were the leaves as summer gave way to the frosty mornings of fall. Thank God this was our third season up the river, and we knew to carry with us enough extra furs and skins to keep warm in the rather unpredictable climate of this new land. As I was the most experienced of our expedition, I had seen most everything there was to see in this extraordinary wilderness. Great black bears twice the size of a man, beavers that could dam up entire rivers with nothing but their teeth and their wits, and a few acres of His Majesty's timber. But it was the elements, the raw wind, hot summers, and frigid winters spent trapping furs on the river that were many times more formidable than the fauna. Now the natives were quite friendly and hospitable, considering we'd supplied them with the first rifles and precious metals they had ever seen. Of course, trade was not a one-sided affair, as they had introduced us, and most of Britain for that matter, to our new favorite leaf, tobacco. But after making friends with the Cherokee, as they called themselves, we'd managed to bring a rather friendly fellow by the name of Roaming Bear on our trapping expeditions deep into the wilderness as both guide and interpreter. This had proved more than useful the previous year. Roaming Bear was built for this land, as me and my old world counterparts were not. He was tall, perhaps a head more than the lot of us. Additionally, he had an instinct, an inclination for reading the river, the stars, the landscape. He could predict rain hours before it came to pass and a cold spell days away. Roaming Bear knew where the beavers, bears and deer were miles away, and kept us from peril more times than I care to recall. But above all he respected, revered, and even feared one thing above all else: the caves. Since his first day on expedition he warned us of the caves, which crisscrossed beneath this vast land much like the rivers and lakes above ground. But as numerous as they were, Roaming Bear, nor the Cherokee nor any of the other tribes we had encountered in our time here, dared step foot even near them. Roaming Bear told a tale of a great, ancient darkness that lurked within them, a darkness that had claimed the lives of many a lost hunting party or exiled member of the tribe. The Cherokee left offerings at the mouth of the caves nearest their villages, hoping to gain the good graces of who or whatever dwelled deep within the earth here. We did our best not to pay it any mind. The expedition this year had been more fruitful this year than years past, between our own experience and that of our new guide. Pelts of beaver, bear and bobcats would fetch a hell of a price once we shipped them back to London, and we would make enough money to live the rest of the year in ease and relative luxury. A small price to pay for a few months on the river. We were 3 weeks into our trip, the weather had been more than merciful and the furs were plentiful, spirits were high, and we had even considered cutting the expedition short as we were well past our quota for pelts. One final push downstream and we would call it quits, head back to our base camp alongside the Cherokee, package our prizes and prepare for the voyage east across the Atlantic. One final push. Just one more day checking traps. Almost there. We brought the boat to rest for the night on a shallow bend of the river and began offloading the supplies for the night. There were 5 of us in total, counting Roaming Bear and myself, along with a handful of hounds and a mule for the heavier loads. Offloading the boat, we made camp on a clear patch just a ways from the shoreline but still within sight of the boat. The tasks of setting up camp and the various other nightly tasks were divided evenly between the 5 of us. There was always much to be done: pitching the heavy canvas tent, gathering wood for a fire, preparing food, and processing and packaging the pelts from the day. Roaming Bear, however, always made a habit of walking the surrounding area before settling into camp for the night. He was always on edge out here, always watching and always weary. Of what we weren't quite sure yet. Upon his return from scouting, Roaming Bear was very clearly disturbed by something, as it was written all over his countenance. When one and then in turn the rest of us asked what was troubling him, he simply said, "Nothing, just a bear's den," and went about unpacking his supplies. Roaming Bear was never one for much casual conversation, but he was also not one to show fear. In my time with him we'd encountered wild boar, hostile tribes, and even a skirmish with French trappers that resulted in a bit of gunfire. But never before had I seen fear in his eyes like I did now. Like he was bracing for a fall, looking over his shoulder like something had followed him back here. Nightfall came soon enough and we had a fire to cook by and shelter for the night. The dogs and mule had been fed and watered, and we were enjoying a stew of meat from the fur animals that shared a pot with some potatoes and other vegetables we'd brought along. The night was cool but not yet cold as we sat in the light of the fire and talked about the events of the day and planned for the next. We knew there was a Cherokee village not too far downstream that we planned to trade with and had brought extra gunpowder for just that reason. Turning to Roaming Bear, I was about to ask his thoughts on the plan when we noticed he was missing from his usual spot just to my right. While he had a habit of wandering off, this was an activity reserved for daylight hours. I had never known him to leave camp in the darkness of this wilderness alone. In fact, he quite often insisted that none of us ever do so for fear of us never returning. Between his odd behavior earlier in the evening and his sudden unexplained disappearance, the camp was suddenly in a frenzy. All four of us shot up, muskets in hand, and scanned about the area. We called his name in hope of a reply, knowing good and well he would not. His musket, powder horn, and shot bag were gone, along with one of the torches we kept about in the event we needed to scare off coyotes or bears looking to pilfer a meal. Wherever he had gone intentionally, in a hurry, and without alerting us. We couldn't leave our interpreter, guide, and friend alone in this unforgiving place at night. He had told us as much. We gathered our own guns and torches, leashed a couple of the dogs, and set out to find our man. Giving one of the hounds his pack, we set the dog on his scent and away we went, deep into those dark, forested mountains that held God only knows what. As we pressed on, the hound strained against his harness, clearly on the path of Roaming Bear. We climbed up as the gentle incline of the riverbank turned into the steep grade of the mountains. Around trees and over logs as we followed what looked to be a game trail. This very quickly died away, leaving us to push through greenbrier and mountain laurel up to our necks. The dog still strained at his collar, eager to find the human he'd become so fond of these last few years. At last the undergrowth broke, and we emerged, or rather almost fell, into a small little clearing surrounded by small ridges on either side. The dog stopped, dead in his tracks, and began backtracking, trying desperately to go back the way we'd come. Spreading out into a small circle with torches out, we began scanning for anything. Tracks, some dropped powder, something, anything. Then I caught a reflection in the torchlight, just a hint of it. A little glimmer coming from the ground. As I got closer I could see what it was. The gilded metalwork from Roaming Bear's musket. His musket lay there, along with his powder horn and shot bag, in the dirt. I'd given him that musket as a gift his first year with us, and it was his prized possession. Of course, it had to be out here given the impossibility of going a day without facing some threat to your life. For him to abandon it out here would surely be irrational, something even the most inexperienced trapper would never dream of doing, much less Roaming Bear. This was all the more cause for alarm. Continuing our search, we cast torchlight up and down and side to side across the ground in search of any more evidence. The dog was clearly uneasy, begging to get out of this place with every pull on his leash. That's when the cold hit. In 3 years out in the New World I felt my share of cold, snow up to my waist as I waded through icy waters to check traps. But this wave of cold that hit in the middle of that clearing was like nothing I had ever felt before or since. It was an almost spiritual cold that hit me so hard it didn't just take my breath, it felt like it took my heart right along with it. Like every warmth I'd ever felt was gone, never to return. It felt like hopelessness. Hitting me right in the face, it wasn't difficult to figure out where this dreadful thing originated. After gathering myself and taking a couple steps forward, there it was, dancing in the torchlight. A narrow entrance and enough room to stand, about the size of a set of church doors. The entrance to a cave. A few steps closer and the dog had enough. He reared up on his hind legs and yanked back, snapping his leather collar and freeing him to leave that horrible place, and frankly I wanted to leave right along with him. But we had to find Roaming Bear, as we knew he'd do the same for any of us. Sharing a look of meager consternation, the four of us exchanged a silent nod of agreement and pushed on into the bone-chilling blackness that lay beyond that little entrance. It took every nerve I possessed to not bolt out of there like the hound, who despite his face probably faced better odds than we currently did. As unreasonable as it was, we all knew this is the only place Roaming Bear could be given his odd behavior and abandoned gun. Single file, I shouldered my musket, as the space was too narrow for it, and pulled the large knife I used for skinning beavers from my belt. At least I had some hope of defending myself from whatever or whoever was down here. As the torchlight began to wane, it cast a bleak shadow on the walls of the cave. Strange symbols flashed on the walls as if being written on a chalkboard with someone else erasing right behind them. The symbols made no sense to any of us, like something of an Egyptian hieroglyph I had seen once on display in London. Swooping curves and lines that almost made sense but were gone before you could quite comprehend any meaning or form a solid memory. Yet we pressed on into the desolate darkness, desperate to find Roaming Bear and save him from whatever fate awaited him in this place. Then with a sudden rush of that same cold despair, our torches went out in an instant and we were left in utter darkness. Being at the front of the line, I immediately stopped and one by one my comrades behind me collided until we all stood one against the other, huddled together like it would provide some sort of protection. Placing a hand on each other's shoulders and one against the wall, we could guide ourselves, ever so slowly forward. Into darkness. Into nothing. Into complete silence. As my eyes adjusted to the oppressive darkness, I could see one thing, no two things. Two equidistant pinpricks of red light, like a candle from behind stained glass. Like a pair of red candles. No, a pair of red eyes. I stopped, too scared to speak what I could just barely see to the rest of the group. Too scared to acknowledge it for fear of making it real, material. Thomas, the burly, broad-shouldered trapper directly behind me, must have seen it too because he hurriedly tapped my shoulder and pointed, silently, right at the floating apparition in front of us. But we didn't have time for much else as the floating lights became larger, and thus even more real, by the second. Then it hit, a pain, a ringing so loud Thomas fell to his knees and I slammed my hands over my ears in a vain attempt to stop it, my knife clattering to the ground. But it wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from within my own head. Right at the base of my skull, like someone had shook up a hornet's nest and stuck it right down to the bottom of my brain. I heard a scream and hurried footprints as Robert, the tailman in our line, ran from the cave as fast as he could in the darkness. The rest of us were frozen, paralyzed by some sort of primal fear that overwhelmed the nerves of the entire body and left one feeling in an instant exhausted, cold, alone and hopeless. Like nothing good would ever come again. Like everything good or kind I'd ever felt in my life was gone from memory. There was only darkness in here. Only despair. Only evil. The interminable buzzing became a voice, like a knife blade across a pane of glass. But still from within my one head. At first it was too noisy to make out, but the noise slowly gathered into a droning voice that somehow made my heart sink lower than it already had. What is yours is mine, 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 mine. The voice was so piercing I put my hands up once more to block the sound, only to feel blood rushing from both my ears. I began to feel nauseous, weak, and feverish all at once, like I had when I'd contracted scarlet fever as a child. On my hands and knees now, I tried to turn myself around to exit the cave, but I had no inkling as to where I was, where my friends were or even which way was up, down, in or out of here. Gathering the last of my strength I pushed myself up in an attempt to stand and felt blood rush from my nostrils and ears once more. The buzzing in my head erupted all the louder and the floor came rushing back toward me. And everything went dark. Somehow darker than before. And not a sound. Sickening, serene silence. Silence. For just a moment my vision came back, as I was moving, or rather being moved. No dragged by my ankles into the depths of whatever else this cavern held. The grip around my ankle had that icy feel of the wind from the cave, leaching the warmth from my body even through my buckskin trousers. The darkness gave way to that same eerie red glow I had seen in those eyes, this time encompassing everything around me. I looked to see what or who was dragging me. Darkness is the best I can describe it. Like the flowing outline of a human covered in a hooded robe, but there was no material to it, no fabric, no edges or hems. Just darkness, swooping darkness that didn't quite stand still. That rolled and danced like those symbols on the wall. This darkness extended to the hand that held my ankle. I could feel it pulling every bit of strength, warmth, and hope from my body. I was powerless. I was dead. In my exhaustion I could no longer hold my head up and let it once again drag across the stony floor, my vision closing to a mere tunnel. The narrow cave walls had washed away into a vast cavern, lit by what looked like red candles spanning the expanse, which went on further than I could make out. As the darkness took the last of my strength, I returned my gaze to the floor to see in the dim light bones, some connected to flesh, some bare and glistening in the red glare. Along with them furs, beads, jewelry, and many other things I didn't recognize. Glass jars, metal contraptions, a coat that looked to be made of bright red skin. And it was over. I could bear no more, and I let the cold overtake me once more. The hopelessness, the despair. The silence. It looks like there may be more to this story. Click here to get a reminder to check back later. Got issues? Click here for help.